I haven't yet been able to talk to anyone in this world that actually had a near-death experience themselves. Maybe you're someone that has experienced it, maybe you're not. Now, these are very fascinating stories because they sort of provide us a new possibility concerning what we would call passing on, dying, death. What happens to us? Well, I think the tricky thing we want to remember is that as long as we only identify with the body that we have currently, it's pretty tricky to consider anything beyond it after it, returns to dust, when it stops functioning. But what we really want to understand and consider is the idea that consciousness itself doesn't end when your body returns to dust. Now, what is consciousness exactly? It is a state of awareness. You're always aware of something as you're going through life. Now, what are we mostly aware of? Well, in most cases, we're focused through our awareness on things that are going on around us, and we're not really paying attention to the power of awareness itself, what it can actually do, what we can actually achieve with this awareness that we actually possess. This seems to be one of those tricky things to really explain to someone if they've never considered it. But I think that is why setting goals in life is one of those important aspects where we learn to use our imagination to alter current reality. And over time, it's my belief that a person will slowly but surely start to wonder more and more about the power of their own minds and what it is capable of doing and what it is all about. What is life all about, It's about expansion and fuller expression as well. If that is true, well then once you drop, does the expansion and fuller expression stop? Well, Neville used to say in his own way that it doesn't stop, you would be instantly restored into a new, young body. Which again, if people don't have an open mind, it might be hard to consider this. But I do want to share with you again that I've had this experience in my own way, where one day I found myself dreaming, or at least the body was asleep, and I was aware that I wasn't inside my body. And there I saw a young woman that was basically, I could feel it was my mother, but when she passed away, she was in her 50s, early 50s. But here she was a young woman. Again, I would agree with what Neville would say. It seemed like she was in her 20s or something. Like, it was so bizarre because she didn't pass away that long ago yet. By now it's almost 12 years ago. So if she would be in her 20s, in a way it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But here's the question. When you dream, even though you might not have had the experience of being aware that you're dreaming and you're basically outside of your body at that moment in time, what is your age? Have you ever considered that when you're dreaming, how old are you really? When you're going about your business in the so-called dream world, which is another aspect of consciousness, of awareness, being aware of things that don't even happen around you physically in the room where your body is sleeping. It's absolutely fascinating, and those near-death experiences confirm similar themes going on there. So the way I look at it is that the human body might as well be a shell through which consciousness develops individually. And therefore, once we drop that physically, the journey goes on in whatever way is part of our eternal journey. It is like a form of spiritual evolution that will take place for each one of us. Consciousness gets thrown into form. We became an individual expression of life. We learn consciously and unconsciously elements of the power that we are, and we will keep evolving even after the physical form has returned to dust. For some people, their connection with their spiritual self is stronger and more intact than for others, which would account for the idea of old souls and people who have a peculiar awareness about life independent of what the physical world is showing. Now, throughout my life, I've had people always tell me that you must be an old soul. Like, I have these people that are very into spiritual practices that I met throughout my life in my early teens. And they would always look at me and sort of claim, yeah, you're definitely an old soul. And I never really understood what that is all about. And even to this day, I don't really consider that concept. These days, I would just suggest that some people simply have, by nature, a more stronger connection with the spiritual side of life than others. However, everybody can develop it. That's what we want to understand. We can also lose our connection with the spiritual side of life as well. it can go both ways. So when somebody who is supposedly not an old soul learns to do it, they might as well be considered an old soul. But hey, let's be honest here. If life is part of the same formless substance that throws itself into form, we're all an extension and expression of the spirit of life. Therefore, we are essentially all as old as the whole universe is, to a certain extent. But because of our current perception and bodies, we can only see this limited viewpoint that we have right now. So considering that idea is pretty difficult for the average person, even for me. I don't walk around necessarily thinking, oh, I'm as old as the universe itself. It doesn't even actually matter. Right now, I'm focused on what I'm doing with my current life itself and what I'm aware of and where I want to go. And how powerful my mind is. I want to figure it out more and more and share it with you and others in the world, so that hopefully they can create and develop more hope for themselves in their future, that things really don't have to be as pessimistic as they might seem at first. So what happens when you pass on? Well, these near-death experiences confirm the same thing I just talked about. It is your awareness of being that you will take with you beyond the grave. Now let me repeat that. It is your awareness of being that you will take with you beyond the grave. You see, when a person has a near-death experience, what's happening? They're aware. It clearly shows that for some reason they are taking their awareness with them, even though the body's perhaps dead in a hospital room. There's real stories about this. You can look this all up for yourself. I know it might be hard to grasp, but this is the best way for me to put it. So in your case, don't be afraid of dying necessarily. People are so afraid of it. But you're also not afraid to go to sleep. Unless you always have nightmares, then you might be afraid to a certain extent, but you still go to sleep and handle and deal with it. And basically it's the same situation where you're taking your awareness to another, you could say, dimension of life altogether. You're looking at life from a different angle when you're sleeping. And it's the same when you're passing on. Now, how did I come to this conclusion? Through careful observation of my own consciousness and what it does, and also by studying the lives of other people who even went as far as to physically die and yet still retained their awareness, even outside their bodies. Again, you can look this all up for yourself. They call them near-death experiences, or in short, N.D.Es. There's even YouTube channels out there dedicated to sharing these fascinating stories. I've listened to a few, and it's always fascinating because they share similar themes as well. The themes of unconditional love, feeling this unconditional love. Well, I have had dreams where I felt that unconditional love. So in a way, it indicates again that dreaming and dying are very, very similar in a way. I'm starting to realize for myself that the difference between dreaming and dying most likely is the fact that when we're going to sleep, it's like we're sort of going to sleep with the body, so we're allowing our awareness to vanish for the time being, even though it doesn't vanish literally, but it's more like once you start dreaming, you usually don't realize that you're dreaming. It's only afterwards that you realize, oh, I had a strange dream or a beautiful dream, when you wake up again. I think once you die, what happens is that you are actually still aware, similar as to how you're aware right now listening to this video or doing anything else in your life. So if you can accept that, if you can just entertain that idea, it can really take away a lot of the fears and confusion concerning what happens to people and your loved ones when they pass away. Because it would mean that their life is everlasting like yours, even though we can't see it with our physical eyes. It still holds a great promise that for everyone out there, nothing truly horrible will happen to them. Physically horrible things might happen to us, but spiritually speaking, you can't be touched or hurt at all. So let me share with you a few other points that I talked about with someone else in private. And that was that the good news, because they sometimes ask me what will happen if I would pass away or someone else that they loved would pass away. Well, I told them that if that were to happen to me or you right now, you can still wait for anyone you want from that other realm. And it will melt away all the worries you have once we truly grasp it. You enter a totally different world altogether, but you can still meet up with people you want. So yes, you can meet whoever you want that you have known over here. It is no longer mysterious to me, but of course it cannot be shown physically to you or others. I have seen my mother over there, and it confirmed not only in my experience, but also from near-death experience from others, that they all described they look young and healthy again. Well, my mother also didn't look the same age, but young and healthy. And Neville claimed the same. Those who passed through the door of death might have been sick or completely handicapped, but they are restored into a young, beautiful body. You won't forget your family at all if you pass away. That's another thing that people worry about. Will I see my mom, my dad, my brother, sister? Will I see my husband or wife? Well, you won't forget them, so you can see them. I think the only time we forget temporarily about these people is if we were to say, I want to be born on Earth again. Because then you take up the limitations of the body again, and you will have a new identity given to you by the parents you have in that life. I want you to really consider this right now. You think you are a certain individual with a certain name. I could say, I am Ranil, but this was a name given to me by my parents here on Earth. It is a name made up of letters. I am not a name. I'm not made up of letters at all. I'm a state of awareness, and it's the same for you. However, if our awareness currently is locked into this body and identity, for the time being it would explain why. Some people can apparently remember past lives, but most of us we don't. You could figure it out. I've heard these stories from others as well. I personally haven't really worked with it, but I did have one experience with it specifically where, again, I went to sleep and I was aware that I was in the dream world. I took control of it. It was like I realized, wait a minute, this is not the real world, or at least I'm not on planet Earth at all. And then I took control of the so-called dream, and what I did was go back into the past. This is absolutely fascinating. You can literally go back into the past if you want. So that's what I did. I went as far back into the past I could. I could see myself from the third person, like a stranger would. I was looking at myself in three-dimensional space. And it's like so bizarre to explain this, but that is exactly what happened. I'll never forget the experience. But then eventually I was like, can I go further back into the past, like perhaps a past life? Can I see what happens? Well, then eventually I started seeing stuff that I didn't recognize. Places I did not recognize out of nowhere started showing up in my awareness, in my perception, in my field of perception, I probably should say. And then I was like, this is very interesting. So perhaps I saw part of my past life, but I never really bothered looking into it more deeply, because I don't really care that much, to be honest, about it myself. But it was absolutely fascinating. So that is a way that if you find yourself one day becoming lucid while dreaming, give it a shot. Try it out for yourself. Go back into your past, see how far you can take it, and discover more fascinating things about who you really are, beyond just this body and name alone given to you by your parents and the world. Now, another thing that I would say was, life over there is not measured like it is here. That's all I can say. So they will always be available to you, these people that you've loved and passed away, that you miss so dearly right now perhaps. It is us individually, whenever we say, I want to go back to Earth and be born again, we take upon ourselves the limitations of the flesh and the name our new parents will give us. So temporarily we don't entirely remember so-called past family members, or you would perhaps go insane. It's no joke. If you could remember the real truth about who you are in its entirety, you wouldn't be able to function in this world, because it would suddenly look so weird. You would suddenly be like, why am I such a limited being? You see, that's the risk you do walk. And people who have had near-death experiences talked about this openly themselves. They said, because of that experience, I felt really bad about having to go back to this limited physical body. Like, it's no joke. It sounds kind of depressing, and perhaps it might scare you off a little bit, where you're like, well, then I don't want to know anything about it so I can still enjoy my life. Here's the thing. The point that we want to make clear to you is that you should and can enjoy your physical life right now, but never forget about the bigger picture as well. That your life won't end when your body drops. Again, even Neville talked about this. Life doesn't stop when your senses cease to register it. Because again, if you're dreaming, it's like you're using spiritual senses to see and do things in the dream world. It's not your physical senses that are doing it. Keep this clearly in mind. That's the beauty of your eternal nature. That is not visible to mortal eyes, but it is definitely true for everyone. Another thing that you want to remember again is that part of us is always part of the non-physical realms of life. So let me put it like this. Even if you were to die and a friend or family member went back to Earth, you still know them as you remember them over there. Because their essence never changed. It is marvelous to grasp. What I mean by this is that, let's suppose when you pass on and you meet a family member and they would say, I would love to go back to Earth and incarnate into a human body again. Live a life on planet Earth again. Well, because part of them is always part of the non-physical side of life, you'll still be able to be in touch with them, regardless if they're back on Earth. I know this is kind of mind-boggling and hard to grasp, but I hope you look forward to that experience once your time has come, once you've lived this journey to its fullest, and then you just transform realms from dimensions. You just shift forms, literally. Your awareness moves out of your body. Then you become aware of even greater things, and that unconditional love, I have felt it, so at least I could confirm that. It wasn't because I was dying, I literally felt it by becoming aware of a totally different dimension of life altogether. So when the body was asleep, I became aware of this great, powerful, unconditional love that burned through my entire soul, I could say. It literally went through every fiber of my being. And in that moment in time, I was unable to think anything negative about anyone or anything. It was so bizarre. The only thing I could think was love, in terms of love and kindness and compassion for all of creation. Now, it's very similar to people who have those near-death experiences. They have had this as well. Now, another thing that I said to this person was, I realize now that the reason we go unconscious when going to sleep, even though we move around in the non-physical at those times, is simply because of our ties to the body for now. But when you die, you won't go unconscious necessarily. It will be absolutely fascinating. But because your body did die, you can't come back to quickly tell others that are still over here. This is absolutely fascinating and beautiful to me. I hope you take this to heart if you've been worried about this, or if you've been missing someone that you love dearly. They're not gone. They are out there still. Don't worry. One day you'll meet them again. If that is what you truly want, you can do it. They'll be waiting for you. So many stories out there of people on the verge of death, or actually dying, and their family surround them, confirm that this does happen. Where those family members actually said that the person who was dying suddenly called out their dad or mother's name, because apparently they saw them suddenly, and then they passed away peacefully, perhaps even with a smile. Isn't that beautiful? They came back to their loving mother or father that they've missed so dearly throughout their lives, and they'll be embraced again in eternal love. And that is your true home. That is from which your awareness came into being. You are the offspring of a deathless soul. And that is also what Neville tried to say, and that is what I try to at least discuss through this lecture, so that you can consider these points for yourself and hopefully find a viewpoint that makes life even greater for you, an even more marvelous journey and experience. Because I'm never stopped being amazed at how fascinating this life really is. Even though physically speaking things might go bad at times, but I can't shake this beautiful awareness. Even when I look outside my window right now and I see the clouds and blue skies, I'm just like, this is so fascinating, this life. So much fascinating stuff going on behind the scenes of physicality. Anyways, with that being said, dear viewer, never forget that we are the dreamers.